huge tome. And speaking of huge, we're going to start talking about what our interview was actually scheduled for, and that's RPG Superstar.
Uh-huh.
How long have you been involved with RPG Superstar? I'm guessing quite a while.
I have been a fan and viewer of RPG Superstar since its inception the very first year. Because it's designed to find new talent, and I had already written for Paizo many times when they did the very first year of it, I have never been eligible to be a contestant for RPG Superstar. And as a result of the number of great people they had in-house and the people that in the very first years they got, like Neil Spicer, who won, who got involved with it very early on, I've never actually been a judge before this year where now I'm running it. So it has been a very sudden ramp up for me from seeing it from the outside, and I've promoted it every year. I think it's the best way to get into the industry. One of the questions I get asked quite a lot is, how do I get into RPG writing? And RPG Superstar is one of my number one answers, along with things like the Wayfinder fan magazine.
Oh, I didn't even know about Wayfinder. I got to write that down.
Yeah, the Paizo fans do a magazine called Wayfinder that is non-official but approved Golarion-specific content, right? It's a not-for-profit magazine that they put out, and they get artists and writers, and there's fiction in it, and it is one of the places where a lot of people who are regular freelancers for Kobold and maybe Wright Publishing even, and certainly we look at it at Rogue Genius Games and Paizo, we pay attention to this magazine because, I mean, it's a professional quality of magazine, even though it is done as a fan product. So that is it, and it does, I think, 4 issues a year. So that's something that they're always looking at what they're doing. Whereas obviously Superstar we do once a year, and if you miss that open call, you have to wait around to the next year to actually join. Although it's still useful, right? When Sean K. Reynolds was running it, he wrote some very, very useful material on what makes a good magic item and how do you write that and what are some traps you can avoid and pitfalls you can try not to fall into. And those are things I've been pointing at and talking to people about for, I guess, 8 years now. So my involvement in that, I've been looking at it, watching it, reading it, and being part of the community goes back to the beginning. This is the first year where I've had any official capacity. And that's interesting, right? Because I'm on the other side of the curtain. And no matter how prepped you try and be, there are things that will take you by surprise when suddenly people are asking you questions and you're like, oh, goodness, I have to make an official ruling on this, right? This is not just my opinion. This is how the contest works now.
Yes, I can understand that, actually. Yeah, wow, that would be a big change. I can't really imagine. And you answered my first 5 questions, so... So now that you're on the flip side, what's your favorite part of it?
My favorite part of RPG Superstar is being surprised. We have, especially this year, I had the advantage that since I was coming in from the outside, I was able to say things like, hey, I've always thought it would be cool to do this, because I've had time to think about it. Because the people who are running the contest Sean was running it while he was working full-time, and he was doing things for his own company on the side as well, and he's managing the FAQ. I don't know how Sean managed to do everything that Sean did while he was with Paizo before he decided he wanted to go be a farmer. So they didn't exactly have time to dial back and say, what do we think's working, what do we think's not working, what would we like to try? So we changed a fair number of the details of how this works. But even so, what happens is we set up, which is basically a challenge, right? We want you to make a magic item in this word set using this rule set. And then we let it loose, and people come up and they write stuff for us. And when you're going through it, you can be like, oh, that's really interesting. I never would have thought of doing things exactly that way. And that option to see people's creativity, people who are, they may have gotten 1 or 2 freelance projects, but these are basically people that are not yet at the professional level. That's the whole point. To see them use their creativity and their experience and their imagination to come up with things that we think is cool and would not have thought of, and want to nurture them along and see what else they can come up with, that's a lot of fun. The community is also really interesting, right? I mean, there's someone who goes through, whenever anyone makes a post, they enter their contest, and the people that write their entries aren't allowed to comment on it until the voting is over. right? There, because we're not judging for someone who can make a really good argument. We're rooting for someone who can write something that stands on its own. But one of the fans comes through and does a post, and he says, "Okay, this entry mentioned Droskar. That's one of the dwarven gods of toil." And so he takes the time to go through and give people links on where they can look for more information for the in-world information that's being provided in that, so that if you're looking at it and you're like, Droskar, I don't know who Droskar is, you can follow his link and find out, so you can judge the writing on its own merit, instead of being confused because they use something that maybe you as a fan don't happen to have read up on yet. And I think it's very neat that someone takes the time and effort to go through and list all that information. They will point to things like, we had a question about what an M- was, which is a typographical thing, and there were a whole bunch of people talking about where it's from and what the code is to get it if you're using a PC, or what the command is to do it on a Windows machine. So the community is very, very supportive and very involved, and that's a lot of fun to watch.
I would definitely agree with that this year. I wanted to enter last year, and I kind of ended up dropping out because I was working like 18-hour days. So this year I didn't have that problem, and I got to create the item and almost didn't get it submitted. But the community is a huge part of this competition. And
yeah, it's very, very encouraging, and especially we live in an age where people spend a lot of time talking about how nasty things can get online, right? One of the mantras that people frequently follow is don't read the comments, right? If you go to any kind of article anywhere, don't read the comments. But at Paizo.com, and especially for the Superstar, you can read the comments, because people are, generally speaking, very polite and very supportive. And even when they say, ooh, you did this thing here, and I'm not going to vote for you because I think you should have handled it this way, they're still not making nasty or personal comments. They're really, really just trying to tell you, this is what I like, this is what I don't like, this is how you get my vote in the future.
Yeah, I think it's constructive. I learned a lot. I mean, I didn't make the call, and I wouldn't say that I learned an immense amount. I learned more about HTML than anything. So, yeah, it's a very good way to break into freelancing. A few years back, I tried entering the I don't know if they still do it. Does the Pathfinder Society still do the fiction competition every year?
I don't know if they do it every year. I believe it is still on the table, right? It's one of those things that there are all these things we want to do, and the top of that list has to be put out products for sale, because it's a company, and if we don't make money, there's nothing to pay our salaries with. So I believe it is still something that's happening, but I don't know what the exact schedule is on it.
Okay. Because, I mean, I entered it a couple years back, and it really kind of got me motivated towards the whole writing side of things a lot more, which is kind of why I started the whole blog, actually. It kind of came out of the writing experience I had with the Paizo community. Now, with the competition as a judge, does it get tougher or easier to judge each level? Like, I would imagine with the influx of 900 plus magic weapons this year, or shields?
Yeah, we had more than 900 magic items, and I decided to be really clever, and we have never changed what the first round is. And we changed it, and we did not give people a whole lot of time to make their entry, and that was on purpose, right? Because one of the things that have been happening is that there were people who were workshopping a magic item for round one over the course of 2 or 3 years. And that's a great skill to be able to look at this thing and improve it and improve it and improve it. But what we wanted to know was, if we asked you to do something in 3 days, what can you do in 3 days? So we changed the category so that you could do a magic weapon, magic armor, staff, but not a wondrous item, which had been an option, the only option before. So yeah, we got more than 900 entries. I would say it is impossible to go through all 900 entries in the time that we have, except that Mark Seifter, who's the new designer out there, did. He went through absolutely everything, which is kind of amazing, and that's one of the reasons why in the thread where people are asking for feedback, he's got feedback for everyone. I did not go through all 900. I have no idea how he managed it. His grasp of the rules and the details that the Pathfinder RPG has in it is encyclopedic and amazing.
It must be.
But I did look through the top cull level, which is somewhat more than 100 items. And in that case, you're looking at something short and conceptually easy, but there are a ton of them. And that's sort of what happens at each round. There are fewer and fewer things to go over, but each entry is longer and longer and more details to look at. So we just recently did the encounter round, and so we're looking at, did you follow the encounter format? Does this look interesting? Do you have a trap? Is the trap properly formatted? Does the trap support the encounter? What monster did you select from the monster round? How did you use that monster? Is that monster the focus? So it's sort of like what the difficulty is. It's not easier, it's not harder, it's just a different set of skills that we have to use. And you're trying to give more detailed feedback at each level. And one of the things that I really wanted this year was if you made it to the top 4, I wanted you to have the sense that I have absorbed everything that Owen can throw at me, that Paizo can think of that might be required. I can do this. I can freelance. I'm not the RPG superstar, but I am somebody who can take a look at what people need and provide it. And one of the reasons we have all those requirements is that frequently what a company needs, be that Paizo or anyone else, frequently what they need is a very specific set of boxes checked off, right? If we're doing a product, this is going to be a product on Fae, then you need to be able to write about Fae. If what we have is a shortage of 2 slots in the bestiary, then you need to be able to write Fae and then need to fit these 2 slots. If we have everything except a CR5 Fae and a CR8 Fae, you need to be able to hit those 2 slots. One of the freelance jobs I once had for Paizo was, can you, in 48 hours, write a CR16 Inevitable with a name that begins with L? Because that's using this piece of art, because that's what we've got and we need it, and we're gonna have to go put this in editing soon, so this is how much time we have for it. And at the time I was freelancing, right? And if a company asks you, can you do X in 48 hours, and you want that company to think well of you, that's a project you want to be able to undertake.
Exactly. Some of the writers from the Writer Symposium at Gen Con always say, never say no to an editor. The answer is always yes.
That's true to a degree. One of the things that can happen to new freelancers, and I know it happened to me in the early aughts, is that you're like, I want to do this work, I want to get paid for this work, I want to prove I'm good for this work, I will accept everything. And then one day you're like, ooh, I've got 100,000 words to write in 2 weeks, and it's on 5 different projects using 2 different rule systems. There was a point where, as a result of my freelance career, I was in the same weekend working on Pathfinder, D&D 4th Edition, and Star Wars Saga. And that meant that when I was typing, I'd be like, and if this character falls, he will try to avoid provoking an attack of opportunity from standing. And then I thought, oh, I don't remember if there are attacks of opportunity in this game. I don't remember if it's attacks of opportunity, or is it opportunity attack, or did we not include it at all? And I had to look it up. So you can overload yourself with work and types of work. I personally frequently find it easier to write 5,000 words on 10 different projects than 50,000 words on one project. But that's because I've got the experience to do that. I know how I work. Someone else might well find it much, much easier to take one project and bore through it all the way to the end. So until you know what your capacity is, you need to be very careful when saying yes, to only say yes when yes is the correct answer. I don't know any editor or developer in the world who will think less of you if you say, I'd love to work on this for you, and if you can talk to the schedule, if there's some adjustment in there, I can do it, but I can't do it in your time frame right now, and I don't want to give you subpar work or not be able to deliver. Everyone I know will say, okay, I appreciate that you know that about yourself and you're not causing a problem for us, and they will keep you in mind for a later project.
Well, that's good to know.
That's absolutely true, right? I mean, there's nothing that a developer or freelance or a editor hates more than being told that the dog ate your homework, right? If you can't, on the day that your project is due, the only thing you should be telling your developer is, here's my project. if there's anything else, they should have heard about it already, right? When I worked freelance and Sean was my editor, there was a point in which I was like, according to the weather, there are tornadoes that might be developing near me in the 2 or 3 days before the project, and I might lose power. And it could take a few days for me to get it back. So if you don't hear from me at all, that's why, and I'll try and find a phone and call you. And because I gave him that warning, he was able to look at his schedule and what he was doing, and he was able to say, you know what, any time in the 5 or 6 days after that is fine, as long as I can really get it then. And we not personally, but our area was hit by tornadoes. The day of my deadline, we had no electricity. I was able to get him the stuff the next day. But you should never have a situation where you say, oh, there was a power surge and my CPU blew out and I can't get this to you, because you're the person's job it is to provide it. You should make sure that, first of all, if possible, have a surge protector and an uninterruptible power supply. But at the very least these days, you can put everything on some sort of cloud storage for those files, and you can say, here's the Dropbox folder, or here's the Google Docs. It may not be perfect because you want it to be formatted correctly. You want to give people things in the format they ask for, but at least you can then say, there was this disaster, and here are the steps I took to make sure that doesn't cause a problem for you.
This is all true. Now, getting back to RPG Superstar.
Yes.
Up to this point, what has been your favorite, I guess portion is the best way to look at it, since it's still going on, without pinpointing certain things. And why has it been your favorite part this year?
My favorite portion so far has been round 2, which was the, I think now infamous map round. We had our top 16 all do a full page map, and the only thing they were allowed to present was that map, and that's not something we've ever done in the contest before. And one of the reasons that was my favorite portion is because it not only did it test our writers for something that is very important for an adventure writer, right? The map in an adventure is the visual guide to fun for both the players and the GM. And there's a great deal more to a map than just saying there's a forest and this dot represents a campsite, right? You got to think about, is this a good use of the page? Is this a good use of the space on the page? Am I providing information that you really, really need? I have in my career as a developer been handed things that are literally a full piece of paper with a yellow wavy line that represents a beach and a dot that represents where a monster's in the ocean. That doesn't need a full page. That doesn't need anything, right? You can just do that with a description. There's a monster in the ocean, there's a wavy coastline, the monster's about 40 feet in, and anyone who is GMing a game can go, okay, I've got a map or a grid or something I can use for that. When you get into things like there's a bridge, and there's a troll under the bridge, and there's an ambush site, and there's a camp off to one side, and that's when you start to have to worry about, is there a map? Is that map cool? Is it interesting? So I really appreciate that we were able to test people for that, because we've had people who are really good writers who have never worked on or thought about their map skills. So even the people who didn't get to enter, even the people who weren't our top 16, started to have conversations in that community we were talking about what are good map resources, what makes a good map. And then when this top 16 maps came out, they were able to say, I liked this map, I didn't like that map, oh, I'd never considered this thing that they're talking about on the map. There are things like, if you're going to do a side view, because you've got multiple tiers, that side view should be significantly smaller than your map area, because that's not drawn on playable content, right? That's a guide to the rest of your content in your map. And you don't need a lot of room for a side view. You can have a very small area that says, here's your side view, and then everything the side view of should take up the majority of that map. People were able to talk about whether or not things were clear, whether or not the cartographer would be able to understand them, because cartographers aren't wizards. They can't add details that you haven't put in the map that make any difference, right? If you just said this is a beach, they can say, okay, well, there's a tuft of seagrass here and maybe a rock there, but that doesn't matter to your adventure because that wasn't part of what you created. They can only work with what you give them. So there are just a lot of people that had no idea what a cartographer really did and what your job as a game designer was to tell the cartographer and give them the tools they need to make an actual beautiful map that will be a piece of art as well as a gaming tool. And I think that entire conversation was useful, and I think a lot of people got good stuff out of it. And Also, I will completely admit that since we had 16 things to go through, it was nice to be able to look at it and not have to read 400 words 16 times. I could look at a map, I could see whether or not it made sense, and I could try and figure out where there were and weren't comments I needed to make kind of at a glance, so that my time was spent more writing up my commentary than it was reading through every single line to try and figure out whether or not someone had correctly italicized and capitalized and used our format.
Yeah, that was new to me. The whole format, that was new to me. It was a good experience. I learned a lot. I can't remember who it was. Somebody did like template checking. And that was a huge help. So for those of you that are planning on entering next year, if you get your submission done in time for template checking, use it.
Yeah, there are people that are, again, that's a part of the community I love. There are people who will assist you. There are a lot of people that will find some folks, especially once you've hit that top 16 level, to be part of their pit crew, which are like your alpha readers or your play testers, right? You can say, here's what I'm thinking of doing. You can send it out to a few people who seem to know the rules and whose opinion you trust, and they can give you feedback on it. I think it's important that if you're going to write for anyone or anything, to look at what they've done that is similar and figure out the format, right? Sometimes it's not obvious, but if you look at a magic item, right, you can see where are things italicized. Well, all the spells in the prerequisites are italicized. I guess I italicized spells in that part. If you've got a spell somewhere else, you can find some example of that and say, do they always italicize spells? Oh yes, they always italicize spells. Do they capitalize spells? Only if they're the beginning of a sentence. And you can retrofit. You can work out from advance, reverse engineer almost any game's format by looking at enough examples that are similar to what you're doing. And that's a useful skill because you'll find things that you hadn't ever noticed before.
Yes. Like I said many times already in this show, it was very useful. Moving forward, I know it's a little early to talk about next year, but with what's happened so far this year and it being a new experience, what are you, if anything, maybe planning to apply to next year's experience?
There's already been a fair amount of stuff that took me by surprise. The last round's rules for round 4 had a few places where I had not carefully enough gone through and made sure that I had updated all the information, and that's entirely on me, right? I could have done exactly what I'm telling everyone to do with the entry, right? The superstar rules were not themselves superstar quality for that round. That's something I can look at much more carefully in the future. Apparently we have not in the past done a blog post every time we have either new information be available or we're announcing winners, and several people commented on the fact that we seem to have even fewer blog posts this time than previous years, so we switched to doing more blog updates because that's where a lot of people look, and I think that's probably something we'll continue in the future. We'll do a blog update for every time we reveal new information or we announce a new set of winners or voting goes up, all of those. There were some format questions. We, for example, had asked for the map round maps to be a specific number of pixels wide and tall, but we did not present them in the same resolution because we were specifically trying to get them to be sent to us bigger than we were going to use, so there would be no loss of detail. The problem is that some people were using a typeface that was sufficiently small that when we reduced it to make sure that we had the same clarity for everybody, what they typed had become unclear. And we carefully put out a notice saying, we asked for this resolution, we're presenting in this resolution, we're presenting in the best resolution we can now, but don't ding the creator for having assumed that we were going to present the maps in the same resolution that they were forced to submit them. And we're clearer about that in round 4. Going forward, we will certainly try to make sure that if there's information that could be lost through compression or presentation, that we warn people in advance this is how that's going to work. So those are all places where I want to continue with something that we're doing that's new, or we can make improvements based on feedback. Again, having not operated it from this side before, everyone at Paizo was well aware this was going to be a ton of work, and I was duly warned, but until you actually get up to your elbows in that particular set of grease, You don't really know exactly where the work will be called for and where you have to give yourself some spare time to say, okay, I'm going to have to put this down. I have to come back to it, look at it again, and make sure it's as clear as possible, because there are people that are depending on the information I give them for their entries into this contest, and a lot of people take this very seriously, and I don't ever want someone to feel like I have led them astray.
It's a good way to look at it. Do you think that at some of the conventions, the Paizo might be willing to or be interested in doing workshops on like some of the different facets of the writings that have been included in past RPG Superstars?
At PaizoCon, we almost always do an RPG Superstar seminar, where we can talk about these are the sort of things we look for, these are the common pitfalls, and that thing is pretty well attended. I was on the panel last year. We frequently have Neil Spicer, who's an amazing font of good advice. He's a RPG Superstar winner and a regular contributor to almost every line, I think. I don't know, and sometimes we do workshops for things like specific rules or adventures, or I think we've even had a Create a God workshop maybe last year where we talk about that. So we do some design workshops. One of the problems with that is that it can be very, very difficult if you get a room of 100 people who are all really excited to hear what you're talking about. It can be difficult to give any useful advice to all of them that we can't do online, right? If you want to know, the Magic Item Design 101 document basically already exists, and it's Sean Reynolds' original set of advice to RPG Superstars, which you can still find online, and the community will point you to it. It's at paizo.com. And he talks about what makes a good monster, and what makes a good magic item, and what makes a good encounter, and things you can avoid, and that's where terms like spell and a can come from, and several of the other things that he looks for as not being helpful. When we're trying to figure out what we're going to do at a convention, a lot of what we're doing is saying, what can we do to get the most developer interaction or designer interaction with the most fans? So frequently the things that are the most popular is where we sit down and we talk about what's upcoming and what our thought process is, and how do you build an adventure less in a workshop format and more in a here's information we've always found helpful format. But we just had some of the talking about PaizoCon recently, and trying to figure out how to do some more workshops is one of the things on the list. I just don't know if we're going to manage to crack that particular nut.
That would be a challenge at that show, or actually at any show. I mean, I would think you would want them smaller, like 10, 20 people. And even that would be tough.
Yeah, and if you're only putting 10 people in, that means, okay, if we're going to have 2 designers and 10 people get to see them, and we're going to take 2 hours, those 10 or 20 people get a great interaction for that time. But in that same 2 hours, we could have talked to 200 fans who might not have as good a personal experience, but 10 times as many people get it. So that's a sort of realistic algebra that we have to do to figure out what is the best use of our time to interact with the most number of fans in a way that everyone will be able to appreciate at some level. That said, right, at PaizoCon, one of the things that James Sutter has done before is do one-on-one stuff to talk about about fiction, where you can sign up and you get a certain amount of time just with Sutter, where he looks at your stuff and talks to you about what you need. It is certainly possible that we could try and do the same thing with game design. I just think there's always been a question as to whether there are enough people that will want one-on-one or even 5-on-1 or 10-on-1 really hardcore game design advice to make that a good use of our time. We know that has been there for fiction, and if that's dropped off at some point, then I'm sure Sutter would find something else to do with his time that would allow him to talk to more people.
Well, yeah, and a lot of people do want to write for Paizo, so that one's probably not going to pay off.
Right, I mean, and we just recently announced that our fiction line is going to be picked up through Tor. So there are a lot of people who want to write fiction for Paizo, and I think a lot of game designers are frustrated fiction writers. I certainly don't think that's universal, but I think it's surprisingly common. And you can look at a lot of the people that did game fiction, for example, have moved on to other stuff. So that it's not that is an impossible arc, but it is that they are somewhat. Good writing is good writing, but good plotting and good rules design are two different set of skills. Some people have both, and some people don't.
I would certainly agree with that. From somebody who likes to write fiction, I would think long term, if you started to bring up a character, it would be hard to balance the fiction with the rules balance, like the different feats, skills, and all the different options that you could have building the character.
Yeah, well, I mean, Dave Gross has done a bunch of Pathfinder novels, and I have been present where people asked him, do you write up game stats for your main characters? And he's like, for the spellcasters, absolutely, because I want to know what spells they have, what can they do, what realistically can they prepare, so that my fiction is still grounded in the same rules, in the same world that those game rules describe. For the fighting and sneaking characters, it's more about what types of things are those characters possible than what exactly is Radovan's base attack bonus, right? Which is maybe not as relevant, because either you can swing a sword and stab someone or you can't. But I've been very impressed with Dave's ability to balance the needs of a narrative, because this needs to be a good story. There are going to be a ton of people who read it who will never play a Pathfinder game in their life, and wanting to keep it grounded in a world that can accurately be described by the game rules we used to describe it the first time. But I've always been very impressed with Dave Gross, so it's not surprised me that this is yet another area in which he impresses me.
That's good to know. I met Dave about 5 years ago, I think, ish, and he did a reading. That's how I met Dave. He was doing a reading at Gen Con with the Symposium.
So, in 1997, Dave Gross was the editor of Dragon Magazine, and he bought one of my very first professional works ever. So I met Dave Gross in the capacity of being a freelance writer trying to write for Dragon, and I got a lot of feedback from him. I remember when he sent a response. When I first started freelancing, this was not done by email, right? We typed up a series of proposals, we mailed it in, he mailed it back and said, there's some really great stuff here, I can't use any of it because we just did our dwarf article, our dwarf issue, but you mentioned a dwarven name generator, and I could use an elven name generator if you could write one. So that's the very first thing I ever did for Dragon Magazine, was an elven name generator in issue 251. And I remember the issue number because issues 1 through 250 I have on CD. Starting with 251, I have to have a physical copy if I want to see my work, because I didn't get anything in on that collected CD that's easy to carry around everywhere. So for many years, my career was writing for magazines, and Dave was one of the people that gave me a lot of useful feedback, and eventually said, hey, you can send me ideas by email, and then articles by email. He was still working at Wizards of the Coast when I got hired on there, and he did Star Wars Gamer, which I was writing for, so he was a very crucial, informative part of me having a career at all. I would not be working at Paizo today if Dave had not taken the time to, instead of just saying, I can't use any of this, to say, I can't use any of this, but this is a neat idea, and this is a neat idea, and here are ways you can turn it into something that I can use. And that was a case where I told the editor yes.
Well, dang. It's good to know, because I chat with him every now and then on Facebook. Good man to be in the pocket of, I guess.
No, Dave, I mean, he's gone on, instead of running magazines, he's writing novels now, and that's where his mindset is. But yeah, Dave is awesome, and if Dave gives you advice, I heartily recommend you take it. It worked out well for me.
That's good. Well, let's see here. Workshops are done. So, as round 4 kind of comes to a close, and you've got all these people hanging on, maybe chewing their fingernails off a little bit, being a little bit nervous and having some anxiety set in. For those that actually make it to the next round, what advice do you have for them?
So, and in case anyone doesn't know, the last round of RPG Superstars, to take our top 4 and to have them pitch an adventure. And the winner will get to take that adventure pitch and actually write an adventure for us for the Pathfinder modules one. So, pitching an adventure is its own fine art, and we have tried at this point to take people through the various steps, write a good monster, a good encounter, a good map, even a good magic item, which becomes either a tool for the enemy or treasure that you can get, which is part of the fun of the game. So it is important, from my point of view, to remember that no matter how cool an idea you have is, there are two aspects that it must match. First, it must be an idea that we can publish. The whole idea here is for us to get a module you've written in print and into people's hands. So if what you want is to write, as a totally random example that no one's ever submitted, but if you wanted to write an adventure where you all end up in a pocket plane that is best described by a Rubik's Cube, and the GM has to take 2 twists of the Rubik's Cube after every round because your dungeon rooms are randomized, that's an awesome idea. I'd love to play in that game. We can't print a Rubik's Cube in a 64-page book, right? That's just not something that we're capable of doing. So that's a case of an awesome idea that might be a lot of fun. And if someone was running that at a convention, I'd happily go play in that game. But it won't be useful for the RPG Superstar Adventure because it's not something we can do. The other thing I think people need to keep in mind is that the end user here is a GM who is running a game for players. So if what you have is a awesome story idea where specific things have to happen, so you want those things to be done by NPCs, then what you're creating is a situation where a GM is going to be talking to players about things they're not doing. And that's not fun for anyone, right? A GM does not want to have to sit around and do funny voices for 3 different sets of characters who are going to have a massive debate that the players aren't involved in because it has to come out a certain way. And as a player, it's not fun to sit around and hold someone's coat while NPCs, who can do anything the GM says they can do, go off and take care of a problem. We want to create a situation where the players are the focus of this story. And they don't have to be the focus of an event to be the focus of a story, right? If what you want is a giant battle that is going to be much higher level and more complex than what the players can do, that's fine, but that needs to be the backdrop of the story of the players and what they are doing. And if you're having an enormous battle, you can say, but this adventure is about what happens at this one watering hole at the edge of this battle, which will turn out to be crucial because whoever has water can water their cavalry and they can win, right? What you need to do is make sure you're focusing on what the players are doing and make that interesting. They don't have to be the most powerful heroes in the land. They do have to be the protagonists of the story you're telling within an adventure for the adventure to be interesting.
Yeah, and that's where I think I would have a hard time with this level. I generally stand up in GM and I give them like 12 things to do and let them pick, and we go that way.
Well, and that's a sandbox, right? And there's nothing wrong with a sandbox adventure. It can be done. A lot of people, when we had the first round and we said you can make a magic staff, a lot of people said, well, making a magic staff as your submission is clearly a terrible idea because all magic staffs are spells in a can and that's going to be boring. And so it started to be referred to as hard mode. You can do it, but it will be more difficult to do it in a way that will get people's attention. Some of our top 16 were magic staffs because those people had a really interesting twist on what a magic staff can do without changing it so it's not a magic staff anymore. If someone wants to pitch a good sandbox adventure, you can do that. We've published some sandboxes. The Kingmaker Adventure Path is basically a sandbox. You just have to make sure that your sandbox, again, is something we can put in a 64-page adventure. One of the ways you can do that is you can say, here's a interesting location, here are the things in the interesting location, here's a problem that the player characters will have in that location, and here's some guidance on the 8 different ways they could fix it or try to fix it and the different routes they can take. That can be done. But again, you have to look at how many encounters do we get, right? If you've got a 64-page book, then between 32 and 45 pages of that is going to be adventure, because we always have back matter, a gazetteer, treasure, monsters, whatever. That means you get maybe between 20 and 25 encounters. You can do a sandbox with 20 to 25 encounters, but that is hard mode. That is intentionally setting yourself up for a bigger challenge. If one of the people who has made it this far looks at that challenge and they say, that is what I want to do, that's my superstar idea, then I encourage them to do it. I just want them to think about the difficulty they're setting themselves up for and make sure they have an answer for the questions that will inevitably be asked.
And that's, yep, then there's going to be a lot of them with that, I would think.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I find it really, really interesting what different gamers see as normal, right? I came up through a gaming tradition that we very, very rarely used pre-written modules or even pre-written campaign worlds. The vast majority of the games I played for more than 30 years now have been a GM has his own idea and his own world, so we take things from the rules. And even if you're using, here's the city of Freeport, we can use the city of Freeport, but we would usually put it where we want it. We're taking this city from Razor Coast, and this city from Freeport, and this city from Skull and Shackles, and this city from Plunder and Peril, and we're creating the pirate world we want, and we're putting in 2 or 3 other cities that we like the idea of scattered through that area. And instead of being the Shackles, it's a dark water world based on an animated series, and there are only 42 islands known in the world. The whole thing's water world. You make up your own stuff, and that's a tradition that I think leads people to try and do sandbox-style games frequently. But I've met a bunch of people where their gaming tradition is, we did Against the Giants and the Slaver Lord series and Temple of Elemental Evil, and we took those pre-generated adventures, and that was where we made our narrative, and what we did within them was where our story came from. So I think there are people that have a very strong tradition of saying there's going to be a set adventure, it will start at point A, it will end at point B, and in between there will be 7 fights and 2 talking encounters, whatever. So again, when you ask me one of the things that I enjoy most about this contest, I really enjoy seeing the different approaches people have and seeing them fit those into our format, because I think that's one of the ways that you end up becoming a better writer, is you take new ideas that maybe haven't been done before and you present them in a way that people will understand.
Yeah, and to add to that, I think actually from the fan side, I actually kind of think seeing all the judge comments, and not just judge, but the fan judge comments on the items has been monumental. It's like, oh wow, yeah, that's really good, and then you'll see like 10 people comment on it, and it's like, oh, there's a really good point right there about this item, or this map. But with that being said, I think we have covered the Superstar competition pretty well. Is there anything else that you want to add?
Just this. RPG Superstar, there's a date, and we announced the date, and it starts. That doesn't mean that your involvement with RPG Superstar at this point has to wait until next year. The forums are up there. The community is very, very friendly. There is nothing wrong with getting in there and saying now, hey, I've written a magic item. This isn't going to be my RPG Superstar entry next year. I just want people's feedback on it. Or going through and looking at the comments, or again, I can't recommend Sean K. Reynolds' notes that people keep pointing to for the first couple of years enough. There are lots of ways to get involved in that process now and start getting involved with the community and talking to people, so that when the next contest comes along, you will be better prepared than you are right now if joining RPG Superstar is something you're interested in doing. So I encourage everyone to take a look at that. You can also get involved with the third-party publisher community. Paizo's been very friendly to third-party publishers. There are Paizo forums for third-party publishers, which is kind of amazing when you think about it, right? There's a place on the Paizo forums where other companies selling other products can talk about their products and answer questions and get involved. So that is another place where if what you want to do is break into the industry, you can go on those forums and see what people need and talk to people and even say, hey, I want to write for one of you who's got something that they need written, and work with those people before you even get to trying to write for Paizo.
I didn't know that existed. I wish I would have 5 years ago. I might not be doing a blog.
Yeah, it's out there, right? And Andrew Marlowe, who's been top 32 2 years in a row, has written several products for Rogue Genius Games, and he originally came to our attention because he had done RPG Superstar. You don't have to win to prove you can do something. Rob McCreary, who's our senior developer, was a top 4 RPG Superstar, not a winner, but he got people's attention, and he continued to do good work, and eventually Paizo was like, we want to bring this person on board. So there are a lot of opportunities out there for someone who wants to get involved and start writing. I think RPG Superstar is the best of them, but it only happens once a year, and you don't have to wait for it. You can go out there and talk to people and see what opportunities exist and get writing.
Yep. Set goals, too. I mean, RPG Superstar has inspired me to once the competition's over, I'm going to make, for 1 month, I'm going to make a different magic item every day.
That sort of thing could actually be really, really, really helpful. For a long time when I was freelancing, I did a feat every day that I would post up on Facebook, and I'd say, hey, here's a feat. I haven't fully developed this. I haven't analyzed it, but these are my thoughts, and then people can give me feedback on it.
I just saw your Facebook post about a week ago on your new classes ideas, and I thought that was nuts.
Yeah, right. That's one of the ways you can challenge yourself. That was a case for those that haven't seen it. I just alphabetically listed all of the classes, starting with the core rulebook, and then the base classes. And I said, if we were going to make hybrid classes, what would happen if we simply stack these together in order? And amusingly, right, the first one is Barbarian Bard. Oh, we've done that one already. That's the Scald. But you end up looking at, like, what does a Wizard Alchemist hybrid class look like? And sort of as a joke, I suggested the Spew Master, which several people have said they absolutely positively would not want to play or even see. But other people made more serious suggestions of what the class would be like. That sort of challenge, where you set up some set of rules and you say, I'm going to take these elements and I'm going to create something from it, which is exactly what Superstar is, right? It's a set of challenges with rules. Helps you not only to get more writing done, but to write to a specific format that you might not already be writing for, and that will help stretch you as a writer.
Yeah, being part of the Canton Writers Guild, I kind of thought that writing exercises and drills were kind of pointless. But looking back on the year of being there, I see it's not so much that the concept of a drill is pointless. It's the concept of how you exercise the drill.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things people can do. Writing is a muscle, and if you don't exercise that muscle, it doesn't grow stronger. So one of the points of drills frequently is just to make sure that you're writing on a regular basis, even when you don't have some larger project you're moving towards. Mike Selinker, who, for example, is very strongly involved with the adventure card game through Paizo, and runs Lone Shark. He is one of the smartest game designers I know, and just plain one of the smartest people I know. Kind of as a joke, one year, he created NaNoWriMi, which was the National Novel Writing Minute, where the rule was you set yourself a 1-minute timer, and you write as much of a novel as you can in 1 minute. Now, obviously, that's 50 to 75 words. But I started discovering that if I had writer's block, and I got an egg timer, and I set it to 60 seconds, and I didn't have anything in my head, and I set it off, and I forced myself to write absolutely anything, so I don't have time to edit, I don't have time to plot, I've got 60 seconds to try and get more than 60 words out, it would frequently loosen whatever was clamped shut in my head. And when that was over, whether or not whatever I had just written was of any use, although some of them were fun and I posted them up before, it did leave me better able to tackle whatever it was I was not coming up with ideas for before.
Excellent advice. Power through.
Frequently, power through, switch gears, hop onto something else. If you really have writer's block, take a walk, watch a video.
Or ADHD.
Yes. As a freelancer, I used to joke, I don't have writer's block, I have mortgages. Right, I was a full-time freelancer. If I did not write words, I did not get paid. So, frequently writer's block is not, I can't think of anything to write. Frequently writer's block is, everything I'm thinking of to write seems terrible. Turns out sometimes you have to write something that you think's terrible and then make it as good as possible.
I actually think that's part of writing, because like I wrote my item up and I rewrote it, and then I rewrote it again, and I rewrote it again. I changed the name about 7 times, and there's nothing wrong with the item. I mean, it wasn't superstar quality, but for a first item for a competition, there's certainly nothing wrong with it. But I find myself, almost anything I write, it's like, okay, I gotta change this up a little bit more. And I think it's true that writers are probably their worst critics.
Frequently they are, and there are some things that can happen, right? There can be, I presume you're familiar with the 7 stages of grief. I think a lot of writers go through that with their item, right, with their writing, whatever it is, right? You look at it and you're angry. This sucks. This is terrible. I don't want to look at this anymore. And then you go through the whole set, and instead of bargaining, we have rewriting. Sometimes you will really if you put something down and you go away and you maybe even give it 2 or 3 days, and then you come back and you look at it, you're like, oh, I see what I did wrong. I have this great idea. And sometimes you end up writing it so much that it's just like painting over something 8 times, and you just end up with a muddy mess because you started to use this language here, and you changed it to this language here, and you changed it to this language here, and you end up with a really awkward construction, and it looks like it was written by a committee. So I have even sometimes, if something is really frustrating me, left the original alone, gone to a brand new blank page on a word processor and rewritten it from scratch, so that the ideas can come out fresh instead of how I've done them 4 or 5 times. And sometimes that gives me the best results. And then sometimes I hate that too, and I have to go away and come back. So it varies.
Yeah, and I'm a terrible self-editor, so I often have to let stuff sit for a month or 2.
Yeah, self-editing is hard. I'm not a good self-editor. I love my editors. I adore my editors. I love having someone that goes back over what I read and says, Owen, this sentence here where you said if y for to, what did you mean?
You write like I do.
Yeah, sometimes. I think everybody does. Also, I have big fat fingers, and unfortunately sometimes my big fat fingers type real words that just aren't the right words. And I mean, I post up typo of the day sometimes on my Facebook page because sometimes they're hysterical. I accidentally created the rockroach swarm the other day. I understand how I got V instead of C, because it was supposed to be a cockroach swarm. I have no idea how I got VR for rockroach swarm. It's an interesting idea of rockroach swarm.
I like it.
See? So sometimes even accidents can be good writing, but I still have to look at that. I'm like, if I were to submit that, I would... Recently, I submitted something to editing, and I had not noticed that I had mentioned Andorran's lumbar consortium rather than the lumber consortium. That's a real word, lumbar, right?
Yes.
And so spell checker doesn't catch it, and I read over it several times, and every time my eyes clearly saw L-R, that's the word lumber, and they moved on. So I tried to accidentally create a group of evil thug chiropractors in Andorran, and thankfully we've got editors, and they caught it. But it would have been really embarrassing to have fans asking me what on earth the lumbar consortium was. Editors are beautiful things. They should always be loved and treated well.
They'd be what, the first yoga group?
Yeah, right, exactly.
I don't know. But on that note, it was a good time, and I look forward to doing this again sometime. Hopefully next year, not this year, sadly. Hopefully next year I'll be able to get out the Paizo Club. But
we would love to have you, obviously.
Oh yeah, I know. I've talked with Eric a few times, and it's just, Ohio, Seattle. I drive, fly, in time.
Well, I thank you very much for having me on. It was a good time.
It was a good talk. I liked it. We went all over the place a little bit, but it was fun. And thank all of you guys for watching and supporting us. Till next time.
Bye, folks.